Shemai guys, welcome back to the Life to the Full podcast, the podcast that helps you make the most of your time here on Earth. My name's Dav Morse, welcome back to the airwaves. It is my job to educate and inspire, equip you to make the most of all that you do. And it's apt today that I've been reading a book called How to Be Everything, a guide for those who still don't know what they want to be when they grow up. It's a book by Emily Wapnick, and it is perfect if you're anything like me. Bit of a fadder, bit of a scanner, bit of a multipotentialite. I want to deep dive into that book. What did Emily have to say? What lessons have we got to take? And how can we be everything? Good question. Once I met a man. He owned a vineyard. We were on a home exchange, and in the welcome pack we found a list of vineyards where we could buy locally produced wine directly from the growers. It's something we like to do if we can, go and meet the people growing the grapes and taste the wine, do some wine tasting and support the local wine growers. And we looked down the list of vendors in this kind of welcome to your home exchange book. And we started looking for a name that looked like they might speak English. My conversational French is pretty decent, but my niche wine-making vocabulary is sadly lacking. I'm not entirely sure how to say aged for 12 months in an oak cask in French. So we started going down this list. Jérôme Dubois, François Delatour, Pierre Monvoisin, and then Eddie Oosterlink. And we thought, hey, there's a guy who's probably from Belgium or Holland. He probably speaks English. Let's go to him. So we called this guy up, and he said, yeah, come down, come to the vineyard. And it was just down the road from where we were. So I think we cycled down, and we had our 2-year-old daughter at the time. We only had one. Or maybe she was 3. It is slightly relevant. And so we went to this guy and we sat down. He had this massive dining room table, which clearly was used to hosting, 20 or 30 people. And it was just the two of us. And he was very generous with his time. He actually opened a few bottles for us to try. And it was absolutely incredible wine. It was the best wine I've ever had. And he went into this story of how he had this small plot of land and he grew everything organically. He knew the soil. He'd been working the soil, caring for the soil, caring for the vines for a long, long time. And in fact, he didn't actually really open to the public very much. He asked us, how did you find me? Because I don't really do public tours. I don't really have members of the public come and look around and taste the wine. It's usually Michelin star restaurant chefs. And so this guy was making this incredible wine and selling it to Michelin star restaurants. And he had the willingness, the humility to share with us. And funny story, our daughter actually went to the toilet and then she got locked in. She locked the door and she couldn't get out. And this guy had to kind of get some kind of screwdriver and take the lock off to let our little daughter out. And he was really generous. And he was talking to us about the wine and the process and the grapes and the type of grapes and the type of soil and the kind of treatment that he needed to do to look after the soil. And he had dedicated 35 years to perfecting his winemaking process. And you could absolutely tell. It was some of the best wine I've ever had. Like I said, he didn't really take average Joes round usually, but he was generous. But there was one thing that struck me, because I romanticize this idea of dedicating my life to something and becoming a world-class performer. I would love to be an expert in something. And I asked him what else he did. Nothing. He had no other interests. The only thing he was interested in doing was growing wine, selling wine, drinking wine with his friends. And my brain is just not like that. There is a myth of the one true calling. Now this guy clearly had one true calling. He clearly had this desire to do one thing and to do it really, really well. And I am so glad there are people like that in the world. But for me, there is no one true calling. There is no one thing that I can do, that I can dedicate myself to forever. I'm just wired differently. I get distracted by new ideas all the time. I get dragged down rabbit holes which seem completely unconnected. And I have an innate joy in learning for learning's sake. I just love learning new things. Which means I never learn anything that well. I just learn enough about something to know more than the average person. Makes me sound really clever. And I derive a great deal of meaning and pleasure from learning something and sharing that knowledge with people in the hope of improving their lives in some way. Hence the podcast and the variation in topics, from personal finance to breathwork to sleep to marriage to mental health to preparedness to Bitcoin, all of which fascinate me endlessly. And I could probably make a podcast on all of them, but my brain's not wired that way. I constantly get advice to niche down. You'll never make it as a generalist podcaster. My niche is making the most of your time here on Earth. Anything that encompasses that, I'm up for it. It is really encouraging to hear someone say, I love the variety in your content. Does that mean I might miss out on a few listeners? Maybe. But if I can connect with more people who share my joyous outlook on the variety of life, then that's great. If you're here for the variety and something doesn't take your fancy, feel free to skip it. I had a mate of mine. We both decided to learn Spanish at the same time, and both our wives said, "Oh, this won't last. Oh, this is something else to get into now. Oh, it's just something new." And that's when I realized there were other people in the world like me. He moved on. We both moved on from Spanish. He moved on to diving, as in sea diving. And I wasn't really up for that. And we both moved on. I went on to something else, and then we came back together over chess. And we got together and we fadded into chess again. It's totally fine. See you next time round. Is what I was thinking. We kind of fad in and out of these interests that we have. So instead of fighting my wiring, I need to embrace it. It feels like a denial of self to limit myself to one lane. And there are more of us than we realize, people like this. If you embrace your fadding nature, you'll be much less personally convicted. And you'll be happier. Like I said, I've just finished a book called How to Be Everything by Emily Wapnick. And as you can probably guess, the title stood out as something that appeals to my desire to do all of the things. I'll briefly outline some of the key ideas of the book and how it releases us from society's pressures to be one thing, and add some observations of my own from my own experience of being a fadder. If you've ever felt resistance towards people who encourage you to niche down or just to choose one thing and stick with it, and this episode is for you. What is a fadder then? I use the term fadder. Emily Wapnick uses the term multipotentialite. Barbara Sher, in her amazing book Refuse to Choose, uses the term scanner. And as I was writing this, I thought, I'm pretty sure I did a book review of Refuse to Choose here on the podcast. But maybe it was actually one of those episodes that I half wrote and never finished. Ah, the irony. Well, Barbara Sher has this beautiful image in the book, Refuse to Choose, of a bee coming to a flower. So imagine a bee coming to a flower. You never know how long the bee is going to stay on a particular flower. Sometimes they stay a few seconds, and sometimes they land and barely stay at all. All you know is that the bee will leave when it's got everything it came for. So do you know anyone who has a new interest every week? Someone who's got different hobbies every year? Someone who changes career every few years? They are probably a fadder. We move on when we've got what we wanted from a particular hobby or a particular piece of knowledge. When we've learnt what we would consider enough, then we can move on. There are two ends of the fadding scale. And at one end of the scale, you've got people who like to do all of the things all of the time. So they might be a runner, they might do cross-stitch, they might be learning German, they might be doing a poetry course, they might be making jewellery, and all of this is happening at the same time. And one of the things with this is it can be very shallow, but it embraces the variety of doing all of the things at the same time. And then at the other end of the scale, you have sequential fadding. So that's when you decide you're going to go all in to something for a little while. It might be a few months, it might be a few years, and you focus just on that one thing. And then when you've, like a bee, reached the natural conclusion, the natural end, you've got all you wanted out of this, then you can move on to your next fad. So you might be massively into triathlon for a period of time, and then you give up triathlon completely and go massively into Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu or something like that. And you just go all in for a number of years. Or it might be that you're deep into marine biology and you can do marine biology for 4, 5, 6 years, and then you decide, I'm not going to do anything to do with marine biology ever again, and move on to something completely different. Now, I definitely fall on the end of the scale which does all of the things all of the time. I never really give up any of my hobbies. I just kind of leave them dormant, just waiting for that right time to pick them up again. And one of my mates is definitely a sequential fadder. He almost never goes back to the things that he's left behind. So where do you find yourself on that scale? Now, one of the great things about being a fadder is that we have many strengths. And Emily Wapnick talks about the strengths of a multipotentialite. And her 4 things that she has are, multipotentialites are adaptable, they learn quickly, they synthesize ideas, and they have big picture visionary ideas. So they're adaptable, they're always moving around from thing to thing, so they can adapt quickly to different environments and situations. You might find yourself in a work situation where you're a computer software engineer, and someone has to give a presentation, and because you've been going to Toastmasters for a number of months, you're happy speaking in front of people, so you can take on that role. You're adaptable. Or maybe you're some kind of lawyer or barrister, and then you need to teach a group of kids how to do something. And because you used to be a TA at a special school, you're willing to give it a go. You can learn quickly, because as fadders we are constantly learning new things. We are always learning new things. We're used to it, and we develop quick ways of learning things. And you can apply that into different areas of life. So you develop skills that allow you to pick up ideas and concepts quickly. And as fadders, we also synthesize ideas. We can spot links between different fields. It might be spotting a finance concept in fitness, or a relationship concept in engineering somewhere. And because we have these different interests and, broadly speaking, general interest in different things, we can link ideas together. And then we also have big picture ideas. And we can see beyond what's immediately in front of us. We can envisage a world where our company's working for making a massive difference in the world, making a global difference. Whereas our colleagues are just thinking about week to week, making payroll, week to week, have we got enough money? And then we're able to visualize, what is it like if we're able to grow our brand and grow into the country, into different countries all over the world. We're able to see potential in subjects that people have tried for ages and just can't get their head around, because we can bring in ideas from other places. It's worth spending time thinking about how you can use your multipotentialite nature to your benefit instead of seeing it as a handicap. We already have enough people in the world who like to stay in their lane and do one thing forever and not rock the boat. We don't need more of those people. We need us to be us. We need to be embracing our multipotentialite nature. The next section of the book goes into money and how, when you're a multipotentialite, you can easily just not really take care of the money side of things. You can just think, I want to do all these things, and you end up in a situation where you're restricted because of money. Now, I've gone into a lot of detail on money on the podcast, far more than Emily did in her book. So go back and check out episodes 12 to 15 on the podcast feed. But she does make one good point that's worth considering, especially if you've heard much of my thoughts on the 9 to 5, some of which I go into in episode 61. And she vaguely talks about making enough money to meet our needs so that we can pursue other things. Now, I've hated on the 9 to 5 for a while, and I am not completely against it by any stretch of the imagination. I just wanted people to consider the alternative, and if they want to choose the 9 to 5 because it's a conscious decision, then that's great. And it does provide you with a level of stability, and as long as you're willing to recognize the trade-offs you're making, then great. Emily said that sometimes the 9 to 5 is what will give you the financial ability to chase all your other dreams. And this is one of the work models that she presents in the book, work models for multipotentialites. So she has 4 models. Model number 1 is the group hug model. It is just one mishmash of jobs that fulfill all of your interests. Now, one of my dreams for a while was to run a place called Paned, which means House of the Cuppa in Welsh. And it's loosely based on the River Cottage idea, where I could set up my business, my life, where I lived on a farm and I grew my own veg, I kept animals, I kept bees, I grew mushrooms, and then I could teach people. And I kind of explored this a little bit. I did teach bread baking for a while, and that was great fun. I loved teaching people how to make bread. But then I could have my family all living on the farm. We could work the farm together, and we could have courses. We could have people come to stay. We could have retreats. We could do sea fishing, foraging. We could do all of these things. And that would be just one thing, but it would meet my need to have all of the things. So I've definitely considered that. That would be one of the dreams that I could do. Then we have the slash model of work. So doing 2 careers at the same time. And this is roughly what I do now. 2 or 3 things. I have 2 things which I do, which bring in most of the money. And then I just use the rest of the time then to explore other hobbies, other passions, other things that I want to do. Then she called the third one the Einstein model. And this is the get a 9 to 5 job. And then you can do everything else in your spare time. One of the most important things that she mentions, and I think as a former teacher I can absolutely understand this, you have to have enough mental headspace as well as time after your 9 to 5 in order to pursue your other hobbies. So when I was a teacher, I used to spend my evenings doing different things, learning different things, going out for foraging walks on the weekend, baking bread, learning how to do sourdough. I did all of that whilst being a teacher. But it was a challenge because being a teacher is an all-consuming job. It consumes your mental headspace, and it could consume all of your time if you let it. I know some teachers certainly worked much more than I did, and some people, when I say, why don't you just, learn some Italian after school on a Monday, they just think, how can you possibly do that? I spent all of my time working. I spent all of my time thinking about work. And that is when the 9 to 5 job is not good for being a multipotentialite. Then her fourth one is a phoenix model of work, where you do one career for a while, then completely change careers to do something completely different. Now this one is one that I almost tried myself. I did actually, a couple of years ago, qualify as a mortgage advisor. So I thought to myself, maybe I could give out mortgage advice. That seems like a helpful thing to do. I could help people get their first homes, help people advance their property careers, help people on the road to their financial independence journey. And I thought, I'll get qualified. So I did my exams, and then I thought, actually, I don't think that's really me. Not much teaching involved. And by heart, I am a teacher. For someone who does a slash career like me, one of the things that stood out to me, I thought, that is actually me. People who follow slash careers dislike hierarchical structures, like freedom and flexibility, and are open to new opportunities. I thought, that's how I've ended up doing what I do now. The next thing she talks about is how to spend your time. Now, if you're like me and towards the end of the scale where you could do all of the things all of the time and you get lost thinking, which one should I focus on now? I've got a spare half an hour, or I've got a day next week when I can do this thing. Then what should you do? She says to have 2 lists for your projects. You've got priority projects and projects waiting in the wings. So for me, my priority projects are podcasting, making guiding meditations, and my freelance work to actually bring in the money. And these are the things I work on during my self-assigned work time. These are the things that provide me with enough money to live and with enough intellectual stimulation and meaning to keep me doing them regardless of what else is pulling on my attention. And then you have projects waiting in the wings. So for me, things like voiceover work, surfing, writing poetry, learning Greek. I just do it when I feel like. When I have spare time or even just time set aside for my wing projects, it means I won't make as much progress on them as I'd like, but that's a price that I'm willing to pay. I know that if I went all in on learning New Testament Greek, I could get pretty decent in a few months. But the likelihood is it'll probably take me years to finish my Elements of New Testament Greek book because I'm only doing it a little bit at a time. So how about you? If you had to write out a list of 3 to 5 priority projects, what would they be? And what about your side projects? Ones that you don't mind not moving forward with at the moment, or ones that might make the priority list if one of your other projects gets completed? A question worth thinking about. Finding the time. And we all have times where we feel pumped to work and times where it's harder to be productive. And if you spend time noticing yourself, check in with yourself, seeing how motivated am I feeling right now? How energized do I feel right now? And if you do that over the period of days and weeks, you can start identifying when are the best times to work on your priority projects. and when are the best times to work on your in the wings projects. Just a little word of critique on what was otherwise a very enjoyable and affirming read. She often ends the chapters in the books with some action steps, which is fine. Write a list of all your interests and start thinking about which one fits into the different styles of working. But she doesn't address the thing that's most obvious. For most enthusiastic multipotentialites, like me, this is the easy, fun stage. It ignores the fact that we often have difficulty following through and making a success of whatever it is we try. I can make lists all day about things I'm interested in, my ideal day, my ideal year. Don't get me wrong, I think those ideal day and ideal year and write a letter to your present self from your 65-year-old self exercises are incredible exercises to go through. But there comes a point where you just have to put in the work and actually do something. And here's some extra reflections from me. When I quit my 9 to 5, I was so happy that I basically had all the time in the world to choose what I wanted to do. I could prioritize my time in any way that I could. I could follow my passions to my heart's content. But even then, it wasn't enough time for me to do all that I wanted to do. I still had to say no to some things. The promise that once I was free from the 9 to 5, I could do everything and be everything was actually an idol, and it didn't match up to reality. But it was only going through that experience that made me be able to put up barriers on the ice rink. If you've ever tried to play ice hockey on a frozen lake with no barriers, you'll know how frustrating it can be. Even if you've never done this, like me, you get the picture. There's a lot of time spent chasing the puck. So putting up those constraints, putting up those barriers, actually thinking in terms of these are the things I'm allowing myself to do is actually really helpful. I actually made more progress learning Italian when I was still teaching maths 4 days a week, because I knew that I only had time for one-ish extra thing on top of my job. I put my energy there and I made a lot of progress. I was pretty pleased with the amount of Italian that I managed to learn in 7 months. My Portuguese and Greek and Japanese has not progressed at all as well, because I'm spreading myself too thinly and in too many directions, and not just because I'm doing 3 languages instead of 1. All my other things. In one sense, teaching was a good enough job which allowed me to pursue Italian learning. But it wasn't good enough for me to pursue podcasting, thinking, side hustling, YouTube, and whatever else it is I've been doing over the last 5 years. You probably don't need someone to tell you to experiment to see what kind of fadder you are. You may well be experimenting all on your own. But if you do need someone to give you some permission, let this be your permission. You have my permission to go and experiment to see what kind of fadder you are. You may have significant others or family members who's cursing me as we speak. But you can only find out by trying things, giving something a go, seeing how it goes. Pay attention to how you feel, what works and what doesn't. What are the advantages and disadvantages of working the way that you do? Being a multipotentialite means that you often start things that you don't finish. Pallet table half finished in the garage? Check. Language hacking German book stopped at chapter 3? Check. Career as a bread baking teacher? Not doing that anymore? Check. But you need to finish some things. And this is a point and a skill that is often neglected. Finishing things is a skill that some people naturally have more than others. But exercising that muscle to at least finish some things is really important as a multipotentialite. Don't build an identity as someone who never finishes anything. Sure, there will be things that you don't finish, but at least finish some things. Part of living life to the full for me is exploring possibilities. It's making conscious decisions about your life with intentionality. So the question I want to leave you with today is, what steps are you going to take to start leaning into your Renaissance self? I'm collecting emails so I can share stuff that doesn't fit in podcast episodes, things I'm reading, learning, testing out, trialing. Recently, that's been New Testament Greek and the Bitcoin Standard podcast, particularly lectures on the fiat standard, but it changes constantly. So if you've listened to this episode and you thought, yeah, I need some more rabbit holes to go down, I need some more pointers to think of where can I go and be more creative, if you want those kind of updates when I send them, go to davidmorse.com/signup. Till next time, peace out.